last month I spoke about verses 3 to 8 of Upadēśa Undiyār, and to keep the continuity from this time I'm going to talk about verses 8 to 10, because 8 is a verse that connects the earlier verses with the later verses. From the subject from 3 to 8 is means to purify the mind. But that is, Bhagavan says in verse 3, he said, after saying in verse 2 that karma will not give liberation, karma means action, no action can give liberation. In the third verse, he said that desireless action done for God, purifying the mind, will show the path to liberation. What desireless action is nishkaramiya karma. That is action which we do without desiring any result. And we do it done for God implies done for the love of God. So instead of being motivated by any desire, whatever we do for the love of God. That is nishkaramiya karma. And though it's a karma, it will purify the mind and show the way to liberation. What purifies the mind is not actually the action, but the love with which it's done. However, different actions have different degrees of potential to purify the mind. So he then goes through the various actions of mind, speech, and body, and says that in this order they will can purify the mind. And in verse 7, he talks about meditation, which is an action by mind. And he says that's better than all other actions. But in 8, he distinguishes two types of meditation, which he calls anya-bhava and aṉaņiya-bhāva. Anya means what is other. So anya-bhava in this context means meditation on anything other than oneself, whereas aṉaņiya-bhāva means meditation on nothing other than oneself. Aṇaņiya means what is not other. So this is in this context, he's particularly talking about meditation on God. So rather than meditating on God as if he was something other than oneself, meditating on him as not other than oneself, with the conviction that he is I, that is, God is what is shining in us as I, that is the best among all. What he says, the wording in the verse is, anya-bhāvattiṉ avanahamāhum aṉañya-bhāvam-ē yundīpaṟa aṉaittiṉ-um uttamam mundīpaṟa. Aṉiya-bhāvattiṉ means rather than anya-bhāva, that's meditation on God as anything other than oneself. Avanaham āhum aṉanya-bhāva, that is aṉañya-bhāva in which he is I. Aṉaittiṉ-um uttamam, that is the best of all. Best among all, in this context, it can mean the best among all forms of meditation. It can mean the best among all forms of all practices of bhakti. And it can also mean more broadly the best among all spiritual practices. That is, any other spiritual practice involves attending to something other than oneself. Whereas in aṉañya-bhāva, we are attending to nothing other than ourselves. We're attending to ourselves alone. So that is the best among all, Bhagavan says. When he says best among all, in this context, because he's talking about purifying, it's the most effective means to purify the mind. In fact, in the Sanskrit verse, he says, the Sanskrit version of this verse, which later he translated Upadēśa Undiyār into Sanskrit, actually into 3 languages, into Malayalam, Telugu, and Sanskrit. But in the Sanskrit version, he says, Veda bhavanāt sohamitya so bhavana pita pāvani mata. Pāvani means purifying. So more than he's already said, but meditation is better than all other actions for purifying the mind. And better than meditation on something other than oneself, aṉañya-bhāva is purifying. So, when he says here, it is the best among all, he means it's the most purifying among all forms of spiritual practice. Aṉiya-bhāva has a very deep meaning. That is, in this context, it particularly means meditation on God as not other than ourselves. But we can also take its meaning more broadly to mean meditation on nothing other than oneself. That is, even if we don't bring in God, and aṉiya-bhāva means meditation on nothing other than oneself. This is our aim. When we're investigating ourselves, we're trying to attend to ourselves alone. We try to attend to ourselves so keenly that we thereby exclude awareness of all other things from our mind. Why do we do this? Because our real nature is pure awareness. Pure awareness means awareness that is aware of nothing other than itself. That's awareness without any object, without any content, as it's sometimes said. So pure contentless awareness, awareness of nothing other than oneself, that is our real nature. So in order to experience our real nature, we need to be aware of ourselves alone, that is, aware of nothing other than ourselves. In sleep, for example, we are aware of nothing other than ourselves. But in sleep, we fall asleep because of tiredness. We don't fall asleep because of self-attentiveness. So aṉañya-bhāva, bhāva here means, is used in the sense of meditation. So aṉañya-bhāva is meditation on nothing other than oneself. That means meditation on oneself alone. In other words, it implies self-attentiveness, which is the correct practice of self-investigation. When we attend to ourselves keenly enough, we thereby exclude all other things from our awareness. So what then remains is pure self-attentiveness. That is attention to nothing other than ourselves. Pure self-attentiveness is pure self-awareness. Pure self-awareness is our real nature. So in order to experience our real nature, we need to attend to nothing other than ourselves. So aṉañya-bhāva is the best among all, not only in the sense that it is most purifying of all forms of spiritual practice, but it is the only direct means to experience ourselves as we actually are. Therefore, when Bhagavan said in verse 3 that Kātanukākum nishkarmiya karmam karte tirti yundīpaṟa gativarikambika mundīpaṟa. That is, nishkarmiya karma, done for God, purifying the mind, shows the way to liberation. The way to liberation that is shown by the purified mind is nothing but this aṉiya-bhāva. That is nothing but self-attentiveness or self-investigation. So aṉiya-bhāva is just another way of describing self-investigation. So this is not only the most purifying, but it's also the gativari, the means to liberation. It's the direct path to liberation. So in this verse 8, Bhagavan concludes the verses that he writes about karma. But whereas obviously puja, japa, puja is an action of the body, japa is an action of the mind, an action of the speech, and dhyana is an action of the mind. But when we come to the stage that he talks about in verse 8, that we leave karma behind, because aṇiya-bhāva, attending to anything other than ourselves, is an action, because it entails a movement of our mind or attention away from ourselves towards some other thing. Whereas aṇañya-bhāva is is not an action. It is a subsidence of all actions, because when we draw our attention from other things by focusing it keenly on ourselves, we as ego subside, and what remains is just being. So turning our attention back towards ourselves is not an action, but a cessation of action. This is what he talks about in the next verse, in verse 9. What he says in verse 9 is, Bhava balatinal bhavanatita sabhava tirutale undīpaṟa parabhakti tattvam undīpaṟa. That means bhava balatinal means by the strength of bhava. What is the bhava he's referring to here? Obviously the bhava he's talking about in the previous verse, aṉañya-bhāva. So by the strength of aṉañya-bhāva, bhavanatita sabhavatu irutale. Irutale means being. Satbhavatu, satbhava means the state of being. Bhava here means the state. So satbhava is the state of being. That's in one's natural state, in the state in which one just is, without rising as I. So being in that state of being, which he describes as bhavanatita. Bhavanatita means transcending bhavana. Bhavana here means or any kind of meditation that involves thinking or imagination or directing our attention away from ourselves. So the state of being is beyond all anya-bhava, if we can say, and tending to anything other than ourselves. So being in that state alone is parabhakti tattva. Parabhakti tattva means the nature, reality, or true state of parabhakti. Parabhakti is supreme devotion. So here Bhagavan clearly implies that how to attain that state of just being, it is by the strength of aṉañya-bhāva. The strength here means, we can take to mean the intensity or firmness or stability. So by that intensity of self-attentiveness, we remain in the state of just being, which is beyond meditation, beyond all thinking or imagination or meditation or anything other than ourselves. And being in that state, that alone is parabhakti. Why is it parabhakti? Because what is the nature of love? If we love someone, we love a person. If we truly love a person, the true expression of love is the liking to give. So love is not about what we get, but about what we give. So if we love a person, we want to give all we can to make that person happy or whatever. I'm talking using the analogy of a mundane human relationship. Likewise, in a bhakti, which means love for God, the highest bhakti is when we want only to give to God. And what is the ultimate gift is the gift of oneself. So only the state in which we give ourselves entirely to God is the true state of supreme devotion. So long as we retain our separate existence, so long as we don't surrender ourselves completely, our love is still imperfect. Love it becomes perfect only when we give ourselves completely. When we give ourselves completely, what remains is God alone. Because when we give ourselves back to God, we merge in Him, and He alone remains. So that is the state of supreme infinite love. So that is what Bhagavan describes here as parabhakti. As I say, this is why it is parabhakti. It's because being in that state, which transcends meditation, that implies the state in which we don't rise as ego. The state in which we don't rise as ego is the state of complete surrender. In this context, we can we can connect this with the first sentence of verse 13 of, paragraph 13 of Upadēśa, in which Bhagavan defines what is true surrender, what it is to give ourselves to God. What he says in this sentence is aṉiya-bhāvattiṉ tabira. Aṉiya-bhāvattiṉ means literally it means thought of oneself, but it implies self-attentiveness. So aṉiya-bhāvattiṉ is the same as aṉanya-bhāva. So aṉiya-bhāvattiṉ tabira vera chintane kalambavatiku satram idam kadamo. That means without giving the slightest room to the rising of any other thought except atma-chintana. So in other words, not attending to anything other than ourselves, but attending to ourselves alone. So in other words, attending to ourselves so keenly, but there's no scope for any other thought to arise. Aṉamanishta-paranai-irapade. What he describes here is aṉamanishta-paranai-irapade, which literally means aṉamanishta-param means one who is firmly standing or established as oneself, so firmly fixed as oneself. So being as one who is firmly fixed as oneself. That is what he in verse 9 he describes as sabbhava to irutale. So being in that state of just being is the same as being firmly established as ourself. And that, he says, that alone is aṉaittiṉu alipadam. So this sentence has a very, very close parallel to verses 8 and 9 of Upadēśa Undiyār. In verse 9, he's describing, he says that being in that in that state of just being, which is the state of atmanishta, being in that state of just being, which transcends meditation, by means of the strength of aṉañya-bhāva, which is what he refers to here as atma-chintana. Here we attend to ourselves. Here he describes it as attending to ourselves so keenly, but we give no room to the rising of any other thought. There he describes it as being in that state of that sabbhava, that state of just being, which is beyond all thought, and by means of self-attentiveness, that is, there he says, but that being in that state is parabhakti tattva, the state of supreme devotion. Here he says it's aṉaittiṉu alipadam. Aṉaittiṉu alipadam means giving oneself to God. So giving ourselves to God, that is the supreme devotion. And how can we give ourselves to God? Only by means of being so keenly self-attentive, but we give not the slightest room to the rising of any other thought. So when we think about Bhagavan's teachings, about the parallels that exist between what he says in one place and what he says in another place, we see that his teachings, not only are they extremely simple, but they're also extremely coherent. It all ties together very, very neatly. He may say things differently in different places, but actually, if we think deeply about what he's saying, he's actually just saying the same thing, but in different words. So essentially what he's saying here in verse 9 is exactly the same as what he's saying in that first sentence of the 13th paragraph of ṇavaṉaha. So though he doesn't explicitly refer to surrender here, by implication, the state he implies the state of surrender, because the state in which we remain in that state of just being, by the intensity of self-attentiveness, and thereby the state of just being which is beyond meditation, right? Beyond all thought, bhāvamē implied beyond all thought, that is giving ourselves to God, that is complete surrender, and that is therefore supreme devotion. And then in the next verse, he says, he continues the same idea, what he described in the previous verse as Satbhavatu Irutale. Here he describes as Udita Idatil Adongi Iratal. What he says in verse 10 is Udita Idatil Adongi Iratal Adu Karmum Bhaktium Undīpaṟa Adu Yoga Jnanamum Undīpaṟa. So the subject of this sentence is what he says in the first line, which is Udita Idatil Adongi Iratal. Iratal means being. Adongi means subsiding or ceasing, subsiding or ceasing. Udita Idatil means the place of from which we rose, from which one. So Adongi Iratal means we can take it to mean Adongi is here an adverbial participle, so we can take it to mean subsidingly being in the place from which one rose. That means subsiding and being in that place from which one rose. That is karma and bhakti, that is yoga and jnana. What is the place from which we rose? The place from which we rose is only ourself. It is described by Bhagavan, for example, in verse 7 of Uludunapadu. A second, I'll just get that. What Bhagavan says in verse 7 of Uludunapadu, he says, Uluhu aribum ondrai uditu odungum einum, uluhu arivu tannal olirum. What that literally means is, though the world and awareness arise and subside simultaneously, the world shines by awareness. What he means here by awareness is not real awareness, because real awareness doesn't arise or subside. Real awareness is our real nature, it just is. It is eternal and therefore has no rising or subsiding. The awareness that rises and subsides is the awareness that knows the world, that is ego or mind. So what he implies here is, though the world and mind arise and subside simultaneously, ondrai means as one, literally, so it implies here simultaneously, the world shines by awareness, by the mind. So it's only the world shines, arivu tannal olirum implies that the world, it's only in the view of the mind that the world appears. Without the mind, there is no world. As he said explicitly in the previous verse, verse 6 of Uludunapadu. So, but the important thing, that's just the first sentence, but in the context in which we're talking about, verse 10 of Upadēśa Undiyār, Udita Idatil, what is the place from which one rose? What he says here is, in the second sentence of this verse 7 of Uludunapadu, Uluhu arivu tondri marikum idanai, tondri mariadu olirum achte pundrum am porol. And that is, only that which shines without appearing and disappearing as the place for the appearing and disappearing of the world and awareness is the substance, which is the whole. The substance here means the real substance, what is the reality. So that substance, which what is it that always shines without appearing and disappearing? That is only I am, our real nature, our awareness of our own existence. That is in all three states. In waking, we're aware of ourselves as I am. In dream, we're aware of ourselves as I am. In sleep, we're aware of ourselves as I am. So that awareness of ourselves as I am, that is that pure awareness, that awareness of nothing other than our own being, that is the ultimate reality, and that is the place from which we rise as ego. So it's only from ourself that we rise as ego, from our real nature, from from the pure awareness that we actually are. That is what he describes here as that which shines without appearing and disappearing as the place. The place here means the word he uses actually in Tamil is idam, which means the place, the space, the location, the site, or the ground for the appearing and disappearing of the world. That is the world and the mind, that is. So the world and mind rise and in waking and dream, and they subside in sleep. That from which they rise and into which they subside is that which shines without ever appearing or disappearing. That which shines eternally. Shines here means is known. So what is the one thing that we always know? We always know I am. So that is, I am is our fundamental awareness of our own existence. That is Satchit. That is the real awareness. That is our true nature. That is what he refers to in this verse 10 as Udita Idatal, in the place from which we rose. And it is also what he described in the previous verse as Sat Bhava, the state of just being. So as I said earlier, there's so many connections between all these. Bhagavan had presented his teachings in many different ways, but essentially in all places it's the same teaching he's presenting, but from different angles, so to speak, or he's describing it in different words. So subsiding and being in that place from which we rose. When we, as ego, we cannot be in the place from which we rose, because the nature of ego is to rise. So if we subside and remain in that place from which we rose, we don't remain there as an ego in something, though metaphorically it's described as being in that place from which one rose. It is actually being as that place. In other words, being as we actually are. That is what he describes metaphorically as being in the place from which we rose. So being the pure awareness that we actually are, that is karma and bhakti, that is yoga and jnana. What does he mean by saying that? That it is the culmination, where the paths of nishkarmiya karma and bhakti and the paths of yoga and jnana, where these paths are leading, they're all leading towards this state of just, in which we just remain in the state from which we rose. In other words, the state in which we remain as we actually are, the state in which we subside and cease rising. So that is the culmination of all these paths. So in the previous verses, that is the verses before, leading up to verse 10, Bhagavan, from verse 3 onwards, he talks about the path of nishkarmiya karma and bhakti. It's important to note here, Bhagavan doesn't treat the path of nishkarmiya karma as a separate path. He treats it as the preliminary stages of the path of bhakti. That is, when we first begin to love God just for the sake of just for his own sake, and not for the sake of anything we can get from him. When we want to give our love wholly to God, we begin by expressing our love in the form of actions. First, gross actions, namely puja, the actions of the body. Then more subtle actions, the actions of the speech, just repeating his name with love. Then more subtle action, just meditating on his name or his form with love. But then still more subtle, not meditating on his name or form, but meditating on his reality, which is that which shines in us as I. There the action ceases. That is, up to the anya-bhava, it's the path of nishkarmiya karma. That is, there's no nishkarmiya, we cannot do nishkarmiya karma except for the love of God. So the nishkarmiya karma is a part of the path of bhakti. But the path of bhakti doesn't end with nishkarmiya karma. It has to go beyond that. So the point where it goes beyond that is in what Bhagavan describes in verse 8, where we leave behind the anya-bhava, which is a karma, and instead turn our attention within to ananya-bhava. That's meditation on nothing other than ourselves. There, the action ceases, and we remain in the state of sat-bhava-tirupa, that is, being in the state of just being, our natural state of just being, which is beyond meditation. There, the karma has come to an end. So, karma yoga is not identical to the path of bhakti, but it is a part of the path. It is the preliminary stages of the path of bhakti. But ultimately, we have to go beyond that to the state of complete surrender. And in that state of complete surrender, that is the culmination of the path of, that's where the path of nishkarmiya karma and bhakti were leading. So just being in this place from which one rose, that is the culmination of the path of nishkarmiya karma and bhakti. It's also the culmination of the paths of yoga and jnana. How is the culmination of the path of jnana? That should be clear to all of us. That is by turning our attention back towards ourselves and thereby just being as we actually are. That is the path of jnana. What connection does it have with the path of yoga? Bhagavan indicates that in the next few verses, the next 4 verses, verses 11, 12, and 13 and 14. That is, I'll just give a brief outline there. In verses 11 and 12, he talks about the practice of pranayama. Pranayama is a means to subdue the mind, curb the outward going activity of the mind. But if we're merely curbing the outward activity of the mind, that will ultimately just lead to subsidence, but not subsidence in massa, subsidence in layer. So it will not lead to the destruction of the mind, but to the subsidence of the mind in a sleep-like state of manolaya. That is, there's no benefit of being in such a state, even though the state that can be attained by pranayama and other forms of other practices of yoga, though it is called nirvikalpa samadhi, and though people think nirvikalpa samadhi is a very lofty state, Bhagavan has made it clear nirvikalpa samadhi that is achieved by yoga is only, Bhagavan sometimes used to call it kashta nirvikalpa samadhi. Kashta means like a block of wood. So it's just remaining in a state like sleep. So that is not our aim. So though we can curb the activity of the mind by means of pranayama and other yoga practices, before we allowing it to subside in manolaya, we need to redirect the mind onto what Bhagavan calls in verse 14, the or-vari. Or-vari can be interpreted in 2 ways. Or can be a poetic abbreviation of aurum, which means knowing. So the path of knowing, implying the path of, or it can also mean knowing or investigating. So the path of investigating, that implies the path of self-investigation. Or can also mean one. The one path. So what Bhagavan refers to as one path, it means the one path that will enable us to annihilate the mind. That is the path of self-investigation. So whether we take all vari to mean the path of self-investigation or the one path, they are one. It's one and the same, because the one and only path to annihilate the mind is the path of self-investigation. In the Sanskrit version, he uses the term, instead of all vari, the path of investigation, he uses the term ekachintana, which some people interpret as the one thought, and some people even say, oh, it can be any one thought, but actually ekachintana means it's the same as what Bhagavan refers to as atmachintana. It's thought of the one. What is the one? Only oneself. The one thing that actually exists is only oneself. So there, Eka is referring to the one thing that actually exists. So meditating on the one thing that actually exists, that's namely ourself, that leads to the destruction of the mind. So the path of yoga, for people whose minds are very outward going and who need to curb their mind, the people who are not inclined to the path of bhakti and surrender, who are more who've got a stronger sense of doership, for them this path of yoga is prescribed to curb the outward going activities of the mind. But merely curbing the outward activities of the mind will result in laya. So the path of yoga can be brought to its true culmination only by merging into the path of jnana, but that's a path of self-investigation. So according to Bhagavan, the ultimate goal is for us just to be in the place from which we rose. Subside and to be in the place from which we rose. Subsiding and being in that place. Place obviously here isn't you. He's not using the term place in a literal sense, but in a metaphorical sense, in the sense of the state, where the substance from which we rose, that from which we arose. So being in that, or being as that is karma, bhakti, yoga, and jnana. That's what all these paths are leading to. In this context, it's useful to remember what he says in, I'll find it, in verse 14 of Upadēśa, because that is also related to this. What he says in verse 14 of Upadēśa is vinayam vibhakti viyogam ajñānam ināya-bhāva yāraku endru aindida tale vinay bhakti yoga unavu aindida nan ondri abe endrum ilu ṭhanaha maṇaṇiya unmayam. What that means is investigating to whom or for whom are all these. Karma means action. Vibhakti in this context means lack of devotion. In some context, usually vibhakti means separation, but Bhagavan is using it here as the opposite of bhakti, so it means non-devotion. So to whom are action, non-devotion. Viyoga means separation, and ajnana means ignorance. So to whom are these? Is itself karma, bhakti, yoga, and jnana. Why? He doesn't ask why, but we can understand why there is an implied question. When one investigates without I, they, karma, yoga, bhakti, and karma, vibhakti, viyoga, jnana never exist. That is, all this karma, vibhakti, viyoga, and jnana all exist only for ego. If we investigate this ego, the one to whom it exists, that I will cease to exist, and thereby we will see that there never was any ego, and therefore there never was any karma, vibhakti, viyoga, jnana. And then he concludes by saying, ṭhanaha maṇaṇiya unmayam. Only being permanently as oneself is true. So the reality is, the truth is that we are always as we actually are. But in order to know ourselves as such, we need to investigate ourselves. When we investigate, now we seem to be engaging in action. We cannot, so long as we take this body and mind as ourselves, we cannot remain without action. We seem to be lacking devotion. Whatever little love we may have for God, or for following the spiritual path, or for Bhagavan, our Guru, it's imperfect. And as a result of why? Because of the yoga, because we feel ourselves to be separate from him. Why do we feel ourselves to be separate from him? Because of our ajnana. So all these defects are there for ourselves as ego. So long as we experience ourselves as ego, we experience karma, vibhakti, viyoga, jnana. But if we investigate ourselves to see for whom are this karma, vibhakti, viyoga, jnana, that itself is karma, bhakti, yoga, jnana. Why? Because when one investigates oneself, ego ceases to exist, and therefore all these, all of these also seem to exist. Or I think earlier I read wrongly. I think I said non-ondri, but it's non-indri. Non-indri ave endramil. Without I, they never exist. So when we investigate, we will see that there is actually no I. There's no I in the sense of ego. When we see that there's no ego, we will also see that karma, vibhakti, yoga, and ajnana never existed. And therefore we will remain permanently, we will see that just being as we actually are, being in our natural state as we actually are, that is the eternal truth. Though he's saying it in a different way, what he concludes in verse 10 of Upadēśa Undiyār, he's explaining in a different way in verse 14 of Ūpadēśa Undiyār. So if any of you have any questions about this, please feel free to ask.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you. On verse 8, where he says, anya-bhāvattiṉ āhum, aṉaņiya-bhāvam-ē, yundīpaṟa, aṉaittiṉ-um. So, and then I'm just comparing that that verse where he says, meditating on God, or the word bhava is always difficult to explain.
Yeah.
Even meditating doesn't capture it.
It has different meanings in different contexts, but in this context,
exactly.
we can take it as meditation, I think.
Yeah. So meditating on God as none other than oneself is superior to all other forms of meditation where God is considered as other than oneself. And then in verse 9, he goes on to state that, transcending all, even that bhava, even that meditation, and being in that state alone, instead of being, is...
No, I don't think he does mean transcending that meditation, because he begins by saying bhava balatinal. That bhava balatinal is referring to this. The bhava referred to there is the aṉaņiya-bhāva. When he says that being in the state of sat bhava is bhavana-tita, bhavana means meditation in the sense of, bhavana means imagination, thinking. So it's that outward going meditation, but it transcends.
Yeah.
Why self-attentiveness leads to the goal? Because the very nature of the goal, well, once we merge in that, it's no longer, we can no longer describe it as self-attentiveness, but essentially self-attentiveness means being aware of ourself alone. Being aware of ourself alone is the path, and it's also the goal. As Bhagavan often said, the path would not lead to the goal if its nature was something other than the goal. So the nature of the path has to be the same as the nature of the goal. So the nature of the goal is to be aware of ourself alone. The nature of the path is to be aware of ourself alone. That's why self-attentiveness is the only means by which we can attain our real nature.
So, but in the process of self-attention, there is a stage when it is interrupted which is what most of us are in. And then we get to a stage when we can keep it uninterrupted, right? And we should, and that's the ultimate state. So with regards to that, one of our devotees here, Abhiday, is asking a question: how to make the state of self-attention permanent? That is, make the egoless state experience in the sit-down self-attention sessions last beyond those sessions. Like, when you try to, when you allocate some time and then try to be as self-attentive as possible, how to make that sort of permanent, how to, I think that's what he's referring to.
So sorry, I didn't hear that very clearly because there was a train passing by outside.
Okay, no problem. So the question is how to make the state of self-attention permanent, that is, make the egoless state experience in the sit-down self-attention sessions last beyond those sessions.
Right, okay. The simple answer is patient and persistent practice. The more we practice trying to turn our attention within, every time, at every moment, we are faced with a choice. Either we attend to ourselves or we attend to other things. By attending to other things, we are feeding the Vishaya vasanas. By attending to ourselves, we are feeding the Sattvasana and weakening the Vishaya vasanas. Sattvasana means the inclination just to be. That to just be means to be as aware of ourselves as we actually are. So by every time we even if it's only for a moment at a time, every time we momentarily attend to ourselves, we are thereby weakening the outward going tendencies of the mind, the Vishaya vasanas. So the more we persevere in this practice, the more the Vishaya vasanas get weakened. The more the Vishaya vasanas get weakened, as they get weakened, the love to attend to ourselves increases. So the more love we have to attend to ourselves, and the less inclination we have to attend to anything else, the deeper we will go in this path. So the only, as Bhagavan often used to say, the only way to succeed in this path is by perseverance. Bhagavan sometimes said, nobody has succeeded in this path except by perseverance. So we just have to, it doesn't matter however many times we fail. We try to turn our attention back to ourselves and it seems almost immediately it jumps out towards something else. Doesn't matter, just keep on trying. If we keep on trying, we will succeed in the end. Once when Bhagavan was asked, is there any sign of progress in this path? He said, perseverance is the only sign of progress. Why is that? Because perseverance shows our bhakti, shows the genuine love we have to do this. If we are not persevering in the path, that is because our bhakti is lacking. So it is only by patient perseverance. And sometimes it may seem favorable to sit and close our eyes and do this, but it's not necessary. At every moment of our life, we are self-aware. We are aware of ourselves as I am. So whatever else we may be doing, we can be attending to I am. Okay, when our mind is engaged in some activity that requires a lot of attention, at that time it may seem difficult to hold on to self-attentiveness. Doesn't matter, let the mind attend to that work, but we're not always engaged in work that requires our attention. There's so many things we do when we walk, or even if we drive a car, or so many activities we do with only a minimum amount of attention. Generally, if we are going about our day-to-day work, we are carrying on with the tasks almost like clockwork, and our mind is thinking about this or that, whatever is preoccupying our mind at that moment. Thinking about all our current problems in life, or whatever it is we may be thinking about, doesn't obstruct us doing our work. Likewise, if we were as interested in knowing ourselves as we are in all our little transitory, fleeting, mundane problems of life, we would spend a considerable amount of time attending to ourselves. Just as like now we are spending a considerable amount of time thinking wholly unnecessary thoughts. That if whatever problems we face in life, they're not going to go away by our thinking about them, but still we think about them and think about them, worry about them, and try to find solutions to them.
Just rehashing.
Yeah.
All these unnecessary things over and over again, you know.
Yeah.
So you're basically saying that the frequency with which we hit is more important.
Yes, frequency and the persistence. Yeah, persistence and frequency are more or less the same.
Yeah. Thank you, Michael. I think that explains. And then with regards to
actually, it is not necessary to attend to ourselves for a long duration. We only need to attend to ourselves for 1 second, but that 1 second needs to be perfect self-attentiveness. That is, we need to attend to ourselves so keenly, but we thereby cease to be aware of anything else. What Bhagavan refers to in verse 16 as Veli videngale vittu, manum tanoli uru odale, undīpaṛa, unme yonichya mundīpaṛa. So that state in which we know only our own form of light, having withdrawn our attention from all other things, that is what we are aiming for. So we need to experience that for only 1 second. Because if we experience that, not even 1 second, 1 moment, one tiny fraction of a second, because when we experience ourselves, when we attentively experience ourselves so keenly, but we are not aware of anything else, we are experiencing ourselves as we actually are. And when we experience ourselves as we actually are, the ego is thereby destroyed. So only 1 fraction of a second is needed to destroy the ego. But that fraction of a second, it must be pure self-attentiveness. So that is what we're aiming for. So thinking that we have to sit for 20 minutes or half an hour or 5 hours or whatever in uninterrupted self-attentiveness, it doesn't work like that. The very nature, until the ego dies, it will be constantly trying to jump outwards. Why? Because it's only by clinging to things other than itself that we rise and stand as ego. If we cease to cling to anything other than ourselves, we subside. If we cease to attend to anything other than ourselves because of tiredness or because of forcibly restraining the mind by pranayama or meditation or any other means, we subside in maṇaṇiya. But if we cease to be aware of anything else by means of self-attentiveness, we don't subside in maṇaṇiya, we subside in maṇaṇasa. Maṇaṇasa means destruction, annihilation of the mind. That state is final and complete.
Thank you, Mike. On verse 9, the phrase sadbhāvattiruttale parabhakti tattvam. It's just, to being in that state of sat or existence is indeed the truth of supreme devotion.
Yes.
It just reminds me of a verse I remember reading in Narada Bhakti Sutras. His quotes like the sage Sandilya defines bhakti as avoiding all distracting thoughts and taking delight only in Atman.
Yeah.
Taking delight only in Atman. It was very powerful. I never forget that.
Yes.
So that's Sage Sandilya is defining bhakti or devotion. So just thought I'll bring that up. And also, another thing that comes to my mind is how Sri Sadhu Om describing the different standards of bhakti, as he calls it.
Yeah.
And then he culminates that by saying in the standard 5 bhakti is actually the bhakti, or the love to attend to one's own self, is the final culmination of bhakti, last standard. So do you please describe those 5 standards in this context? So it's sort of I thought we'll just go with this, the description of bhakti today's work.
Well, what Sadhu Om describes there is he describes the stages of bhakti as standards in a school. If we are not attending this school at all, the principle of those children who don't attend this school is might is right. They will, by any means whatever, they will get what they will try to achieve what they want. We can see, I mean, there will always be people like that. We see nowadays, as has always existed in the past, ruthless politicians who'll do anything to get the power that they want, or ruthless business people who don't care about how much they're destroying the environment or how much they're exploiting people, how much poverty and suffering they're causing. All they want is to accumulate more and more billions. That's all they care about. That such people are children who haven't even entered this school of bhakti. The first standard in the school of bhakti is basically the well, in Hinduism it's expressed through the ritualistic actions described in the Vedas. That is, a belief just in the efficacy of certain ritualistic actions. Such and such an action will produce such and such a result. So if I want to achieve happiness, if I want to experience, go to heaven after I die or something, I simply have to do these such and such actions. And if I do such and such actions, either they believe there's no God except them, but God is bound by my actions, or they believe if at all there's a God, if I've done these actions, he has to give me whatever I want because I've done the action. The actions are more powerful than God. That is the state of the Dvarakavana rishis, which is the story context. In the context of the story of Dvarakavana rishis, Bhagavan wrote this Upadēśa Undiyār. That is, those Dvarakavana rishis, they believed, Murugan describes in one of the verses, verses leading up to Upadēśa Undiyār, their belief was karma te andri kadavalile. Except karma, there is no God. Karma is supreme. So that is the first standard of the school of bhakti. So in that first standard, even it's not necessary to believe in God. You just believe in certain, you abide by the actions that are prescribed in the Vedas, or if you belong to some other religion, whatever is said in the Quran or in the Bible or in whatever holy book you believe in, you believe that if you do such and such an action, if you go to church every Sunday, if you go to the synagogue every Saturday, if you go to the mosque every Friday, if you do your prayers 5 times a day, whatever, you will then go to heaven and all will be well. So that is a very, so in the first standard, belief in God is more or less optional. It's your primary faith is in the actions that are prescribed in whatever holy book it is. In the second standard, the second standard requires a faith in God. But in the second standard, because the mind is full of many desires, it believes certain gods have certain powers. If you want wealth, you worship Venkateshwara. If you want to have obstacles removed, you will worship Ganapati. So they think different gods have different powers. So if you worship many different gods, all your many different desires can be fulfilled. So in the second standard, people's devotion isn't to one, it's to many, which is reflecting the multiplicity of their desires. This is not only in Hinduism, even in other religions, you can find this in one way or another. Pilgrimages to different holy places. Some holy places have this efficacy, some holy place. If you want to be cured of disease, you go to Lourdes. If you want something else, it's there. That is, though Sadhu Om describes it mainly in the context of the Hindu religion, it's because the Hindu religion covers everything, but you can find the same thing in different religions. In the Roman Catholic Church, they believe in so many saints. In Eastern Orthodox Christianity, similarly, they believe in they worship different icons, and they have different saints, and it's all because of a multiplicity of desires. So they worship different, they pray to different saints for different, to achieve different, if you're going traveling, you pray to St. Christopher because he's the patron saint of travelers. If you've lost something, you pray to some other god who's the, I don't know, I've forgotten who, I mean, some other saint, I've forgotten which saint it is, who helps you find things. So these sort of mentality is there in all religions in one form or another. So that's a second standard, where there's still lots of desires in the world. And so you worship God. Even in the monotheistic religion, they find some way of, like in Catholicism and Eastern Orthodox, they've got different saints. In Islam, they may have different shrines of different Sufi saints, so they'll find some way or other. And in Buddhism also, there are holy places and different forms of Buddha and different deities are there. So this multiplicity is there in all religions for people who are at that stage, that second standard stage. Then in the third standard is where you, instead of worshipping many, you worship only one. You lose your taste in worshipping all these different names and forms. You recognize God is only one. If I want what I want, I should pray just to God. So in the third standard, there's eka-bhakti. But the third standard is divided into two parts, 3A and 3B. In 3A, it is still karmiya bhakti. Just like in the first standard, second standard, in 3A, your devotion is not actually for God, it is for what you think you can get from God. So you pray to God to remove this difficulty, to cure this disease or anything. It's just the difference between the second standard and 3A. In second standard, you may be praying to many different names and forms of God or many different saints. In 3A, you pray only to one form. So you have an Ishtadeva, a favorite form of God. So you decide, I'm going to worship only Krishna or only Rama or only Shiva or only Jesus or only Buddha or whoever it may be. You choose one and you stick to that. But you're still praying to God for the fulfillment of your desires. True bhakti begins only in standard 3B. Standard 3B, like standard 3A, your devotion is directed to one name and form. But instead of worshipping that one name and form for what you think you can get from it, you have love for God for his own sake. So instead of asking God, give me this, give me that, you're praying to God, I want to give myself to you. You give me whatever is good for me. Let me surrender myself entirely to you. Your will is my will. So that is where it's from the third B standard, but the real bhakti begins. That is love for God for the sake of God, not for the sake of what we can get from God. But in 3B, it is the stage of anya-bhava. You're still worshipping God as something other than yourself. So because we can never actually find God outside ourselves, because God is not outside ourselves. God is our own real nature. So it becomes necessary for God to appear in the form of Guru to tell us what you are seeking lies within you. So that is the fourth standard, when we begin to follow the teachings of the Guru. But though Guru tells us what you are seeking lies only within you, we want to cling to the Guru. Like a story Sadhu Om often used to say about Janaki Mata. Janaki Mata was a devotee of Bhagavan from Tanjore. She often used to visit Tiruvannamalai, and she had her own devotees. She was a little bit of a guru in her own way. She had some disciples. So she, with all her disciples, she used to visit Ramanashram frequently. And she was very much devoted to Bhagavan. I mean, when she was at home in Tanjore, she had a big picture of Bhagavan and she was worshipping his picture and reciting Aksharamlaya and everything. But one day when she came to the ashram, when she was staying nearby the ashram, she saw Bhagavan coming from the Gosala, that's from cowshed, and only one or two people were about. So she thought this is a very good opportunity. So she approached Bhagavan, she prostrated and held his feet. And Bhagavan stood there and he looked down at her with a smile and said, "What are you doing?" She said, "I'm holding the feet of my guru." Bhagavan said, "Are these the feet of your guru? This body is perishable, these feet are perishable. If this is the feet of your guru, this is going to perish. So this cannot be the real feet of your guru. The feet of your guru are what are shining in you as eye. Cling to those feet alone will save you." So that is a typical description of someone in the fourth standard. The guru is telling us, attend to yourself. We are saying, no, we want to cling to you, which is natural. It's natural, and it's not inappropriate. So long as we don't yet have sufficient love to keep our attention wholly on ourselves, when our attention comes out, it's appropriate to have devotion to the name and form of guru. Bhagavan exemplified it in aṉiya-bhāvattiṉ Panchakam. In aṉiya-bhāvattiṉ Panchakam, Bhagavan has beautifully blended the bhakti for the name and form with the non-dual bhakti. That in many of the verses, we can interpret in two ways. We can interpret either Bhagavan is talking about the name and form of arunacha, or he's talking about arunacha means our real nature, which is what arunacha actually is. So in the fourth standard, we are going between trying to follow what the Guru taught us, which is to turn within and surrender ourselves, and clinging to the outward form of the Guru as our only refuge in the outside world. So that is the fourth standard. But when we actually turn our attention within and cling to ourself alone, that is the fifth standard. That is the state in which we merge wholly, and we merge back into. That is what Bhagavan describes in verse 10. Udita irital or dungi irital. Or what he describes in verse 9 as Sabbhava-tirutale, Bhava Latinal, Bhavanatita, Sabbhava-tirutale Undīpaṟa, Parabhakti Tattva Mundīpaṟa. That is the supreme devotion. That is the fifth standard.
Thank you, Michael. So one is you just love the rituals, you love material things. Yes. I remember reading in your blog, that's really not bhakti. Basically,
it's better than just, at least such people, they may have very strong desires, but at least they believe in dharma. They believe in fulfilling their desires in what they take to be right by righteous means. So but the dharma at least curbs their desires, keeps their desires within certain limits. If you don't follow dharma, which is what the people who are outside the school, they're not following dharma. That is the majority of people who are successful in a worldly sense, they're not following any dharma. They're ruthless. If they're politicians, they want to. It doesn't matter. They're shameless. Some of these people, they do whatever they can get away with. And likewise, a lot of these business people, I mean, so many of the big industries nowadays, the fossil fuel industry and this pesticide industry. I mean, like Monsanto and all these companies, they're ruthless they unconcerned about the amount of damage they're causing to the world. They're unconcerned about the fact that they're destroying the world for their own children and grandchildren. All they want is to here and now to attain. So they are not bound by any type of dharma. In the first standard, they're at least bound by dharma. They won't go beyond what they think is the right thing to do.
That is true. And there are so many of those unethical practices around. Just as a quick recap, so on stage one is love just for those rituals, love for this materialism, and I'm sorry, standard one, and standard two is a love for multiple gods, thinking that each god can give a different thing to us.
Yes.
And 3A is love to just one god, but it's still for a desire to other things. It's still a kamya-bhakti. And then 3B is love to one god, but now it is matured into a nishkamya bhakti. So you're just loving God for the sake of God.
Yes.
And then standard 4 is Guru Bhakti, and which leads to standard 5, which is Swatma Bhakti, which is love to attend to one's own self.
Exactly.
Thank you, Michael. And then I just had a question come up from Shohan. In the path of self-attention, how do I differentiate between selflessness and selfishness? Can someone accuse my devotion to this practice as just being selfish? And can he be right? Maybe my question is, how do I differentiate between turning within to our real I versus turning in towards our ego I?
Selfishness means when we are concerned only about the person we seem to be. If I'm selfish, I'm only concerned about the well-being of Michael. If other people are suffering, I'm not much concerned, because so long as Michael's okay, I'm happy because I'm Michael. That is what selfishness is. It is the self in the word selfishness is the person that we seem to be. In self-investigation, we already understand that this, it may not be our experience, but at least we've come to the understanding that though I seem to be Michael or whoever, this is not what I actually am. I am not actually this person that I seem to be. We are turning our attention within in order to find out what we actually are. So we are trying to separate ourselves from this small self that we now mistake ourselves to be, to experience ourselves as we actually are. So that it is actually the very opposite of selfishness. It is self-surrender. It is giving up this small self, this ego self, and we can give it up only by knowing ourselves as we actually are. What we actually are is the one infinite whole, other than which there is nothing. So if that is selfishness, then we should all be selfish. But it's not selfishness in the sense in which the term is usually understood. The term, when we talk about selfishness, we mean a person who's ego-centered, who's centered on the person that they currently take themselves to be.
Okay. Thank you, Michael. And then moving on to the next verse.
But it may appear in the views of other people. There will always be worldly people who say, oh, it's very selfish to follow the spiritual path. You're only concerned about your own salvation. We can't argue with them because that's all they understand.
Right. So coming to the next verse, which is verse 10, உதித்த இடத்தில் ஒடுங்கி இருத்தல் அது கர்மம் பக்தியும் mundīpaṛa, அது yoga ஞானம் mundīpaṛa. So to abiding in the state from which we arouse, that is karma, that is bhakti, that is yoga, and that is jnana. So with regards to that verse, we have I just wanted, there's a comment I wanted to make. First is a quote from Gita, chapter 5, verse 4, where he says, "It is child's talk, not the view of the wise, that the paths of knowledge and action differ. He who is firmly established in one obtains the fruits of both." I think that one verse is very clear. Krishna is very clear that it's actually, in fact, there's a little bit of scold, as of people who try to differentiate both, and that because it culminates in the same result.
Yeah.
And then with regards to the yoga that you mentioned there, I know you'll be discussing that in depth in the coming verses, but there is a question, so I thought we'll just go ahead and get that out. Do you think, this is from Satya, do you think that we have manolaya every time we fall asleep, as there is dissolution of empirical world with sleep?
Sorry, I didn't catch the last bit of that.
So do you think that we have manolaya every time we fall asleep, as there is dissolution of empirical world with sleep?
Yes, sleep is a state of manolaya. Manolaya simply means temporary dissolution of the mind. And because the mind is dissolved, since the whole world exists only in the mind, it's also a temporary dissolution of the world.
Right.
But when you wake up and ask the world, were you dissolved when I was asleep? The world will say, no, 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 I was still here. But the world doesn't come and tell us that it was here while we were asleep.
Right. So basically,
any state in which the mind is temporarily dissolved, whether it be because of, in sleep, we fall asleep because of tiredness. There are other similar states of manolaya. If we are to undergo some surgery and are given general anesthesia, that is a state of manolaya. If we practice pranayama and subside into what is called kevala nirvikalpa samadhi, that is manolaya. Any state in which the mind dissolves completely, but only temporarily, that is manolaya. So Bhagavan says in verse 13, there are two states of dissolution of mind. There's laya, which is temporary, and nasa, which is permanent. Nasa means annihilation, destruction.
Good, good. So with regards to the bhakti, you mentioned the previous verse, and in the beginning of the session, you also mentioned about Alan Jacobs passing away. Very sorry to hear that.
Yeah.
I know it's very hard to describe the emotions of a person, but from your knowledge of Alan Jacobs, could you please share us, because we in the United States don't know much about him. Can you share us his bhakti to Bhagavan as sort of as a modern example for our verse here?
Well, he was a good devotee. He was very much devoted to Bhagavan. He I have known of him for many years, but I really came to know him well. I knew him best during the last years of his life, last 5 to 10 years of his life. And whenever I talked to him, he always used to love to talk about Bhagavan's teachings. And particularly during the last year or so, when he was very ill, I think there was nothing but cheered him up so much as when anyone talked to him about Bhagavan and about surrender and about letting everything, but leaving everything to Bhagavan. Bhagavan will take care of everything. So whenever I used to talk to him, I just talked these things, and he was always very happy to hear those things.
That's good. So almost like you know, just leave everything to Bhagavan. It's his will is.
Ultimately, we have to come to that. We have no choice. The sooner we leave everything to Bhagavan, the better.
Right.
But when we come to the final stages of our life, when we are sick and the body is weak and the mind is weak and nothing is cooperating with us, we are left with no choice but to surrender. But if we surrender, if we learn to surrender earlier, it makes it much easier at that stage.
That's right. Rather than to surrender after a bunch of hardships, literally being forced to that edge.
Yeah. But if it's just hardships that force us to the edge, we're not really ready to let go.
Yeah.
So we need to learn to let go even while we're alive. Then when when we near the end of our life, letting go will be so much easier.
Good. So I think I pretty much asked the questions that that have been asked so far, and what
Kumar, I have a question.
And what comment I had to make. Yes, go ahead.
Michael, so I joined it late, so this might be a question. If it's answered before, please choose not to. I can get with Kumar. But when you're in your formative years, when you got in touch with Bhagavan, the attractions of the material world are pretty strong. Money, position, whatever it is, attraction towards family and all that. So in spite of that, you went over there and spent significant amount of time with in the ashram. So my question is, did that come naturally to you, or did you do anything to make that happen for you?
We can't say. I mean, we are all we have a very narrow view of our spiritual development, because our memories go back only to the early stages of the life of the present body. But whatever, we all come to this world with not only with karmas from the past, but also with vasanas from the past. And so why some people are drawn to the spiritual path, some people are not, because it's because of it's a resumption of whatever we've been doing in previous lives. We know nothing about our previous lives, but all I can say is I was always, when I was very young, I believed, I was brought up as a Roman Catholic, and I believed all that I was a very trusting child. So whatever my parents and people told me, I believed. But by the time I was a teenager, I was beginning to question things. I was questioning things not because I wanted to reject things, but because I wanted to be more convinced. So I went to a boarding school which was run by Benedictine monks. So I was always saying, why should we believe these things? I was asking that not because I wanted not to believe, I wanted a good reason to believe. And they say, oh, you just have to, faith is a leap in the dark. You just, and I say, well, you can believe anything then. I mean, you must have some reason for believing. And then they told me, oh, you wouldn't understand these things because you're not religious. I said, what do you mean I'm not religious? They said, you ask too many questions. So obviously I was of a particular type of mentality, but was not suited to that, because I've got a very questioning mind. So I wasn't, of course, like everyone else, there's attractions to the material world. But for me, I came from a relatively wealthy family, so I wasn't, material things didn't loom very large in my mind. I was mostly concerned about trying to find a meaning and a purpose for life. Since I didn't really know where to look, but somehow I had an idea India was a spiritual country. So in my first year of university, I took time off and I traveled to India, not really knowing what I would find. And I visited many holy places, many kshetras in the Himalayas and North India, and ashrams, and I did some vipassana meditation, and I tried this and that. I was very curious to understand all these things, but I didn't really find what I was looking for. But when I came to Ramanashram, I knew very little about Bhagavan. I just read, someone had shown me Osborne's biography of Bhagavan, and I'd read about Bhagavan's death experience. That kindled my curiosity, but that was really all I knew. And I think someone else had shown me some hermit in the Himalayas or some book by Brunton where he indirectly refers to Bhagavan. But I really didn't know much about Bhagavan before I went there. But when I came to Ramanashram, the first thing I read was Who Am I? And as soon as I read that, I felt this is what I've been looking for. I don't pretend I understood it. I mean, I understood probably 1% of it, but that 1% was sufficient. But what I understood is, how can we know the truth about anything else when we don't know the truth about ourselves? First, we have to know what we ourselves are. So from the time I read Who Am I was convinced this is the path for me. So when I visited Tiruvannamalai, I thought I may just stay a few days or a week or so. I ended up staying there 20 years. And I was very fortunate that very early in my stay there, I came into contact with Sadhu Om, and he enabled me to understand Bhagavan's teaching much more deeply than I would have been able to understand them if I just relied on the English books that were then available. So even now, I don't claim to be any great spiritual aspirant or anything. Even now, my mind has attraction towards the world. My mind is still outgoing. I'm still far from perfect. But for me, well, even before I came to Bhagavan, I was seeking something but not knowing what. When I came to Bhagavan, I was convinced this is what I've been looking for. And that attraction to Bhagavan's teachings, it just grows deeper and deeper as time goes on. The more I study them, the more I try my best in my own little way to put them into practice, the more attraction there is to Bhagavan's teachings. And the more we are attracted to Bhagavan's teachings, the less the attractions of the world, the world loses its attractions. Nothing seems so important. Yes, I still want to live a comfortable life. I still want to have a shelter. I want the basic comforts of life. But I'm not really, I mean, after all, supposing we had lots of wealth, what is the use? After a few years, we're going to have to leave it all and go. So achieving worldly achievements are really, if we think about it, it's really not worth struggling so much for all the worldly achievements that most of us spend our lifetime struggling for. But that doesn't mean I've got great vairagya or anything. Just, but somehow there's attraction to Bhagavan's teachings is slowly weaning my mind off its attraction to the world. Does that adequately answer the question? You're muted.
My monkey mind is asking one last question on that. It's a stupid academic question, but from which year to which year were those 20 years you were in the ashram?
From 76 to 96.
So you just went there and just stayed there. You didn't come back.
Yes.
Yep. You know, sometimes I like the.
Usually I don't like talking about myself because it's not really important. In Bhagavan's path, we are trying to find out what we really are. So each one of us will have a story of how we came to Bhagavan and what attracted us and everything. But this is the story of a little person. The person we seem to be is very, very insignificant. So my experience, I mean, we all, what's common to all of us, somehow we've been attracted to Bhagavan's path. We've been attracted to Bhagavan. That's all that really matters. How it happens to have been, that's just incidental.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Michael. So as a conclusion, could you, I know we had an email exchange on this. Could you please discuss one or more verses of Eppadiyo Arulvai, just to demonstrate the bhakti that Sadhu Om has exemplified. You know, so one more time, if you don't mind. Do you want me to read the verses, or?
I'll see if I can remember. You can help me.
Okay.
As far as I can remember, Eppadiyo Arulvai means, Eppadiyo means in any way. Arulvai means, Arulvai can either be an optative, may you bestow grace, or it can be a statement. You bestow grace. So, but we can take it as a prayer. Bestow grace in any way, in any way. That implies in any way you wish, not my wish. So that's the title of the song, Eppadiyo Arulvai. In the first verse he says, and the first verse is repeated again and again, Eppadiyo Arulvai, that is bestow grace in any way, aṉiya-bhāvam nān-arivain. How can I understand that? Ippadi appadi endrune Eppadiyo Arulvai. Ippadi appadi means in this way or in that way. Endru Eppadiyo, that is requesting you or prompting you to bestow it in this way or that way. Is it not futile? And that is generally most people who pray to God. I want this, I want that. That is, we pray to God with certain requests, as if we think we know better than God knows. God knows what is best for us. So why don't we let him bestow grace in whatever way he thinks fit? Why should we ask for, we may think that if we pass our exam and get a better job, or are able to buy a better car, or have a nicer house, or have a nice husband or wife and nice children, we may think that is good for us. But what is actually good for us is known only to Bhagavan. So whatever is good for us, he will give us. So let him do it in any way he wishes. That's the general idea behind it. We shouldn't be asking ippadi appadi, in this way and that way. You, in any way you wish, you bestow your grace on me, because you know better than I know. What's the second verse? Can you just prompt me?
Valvil evayellam.
Okay. Valvil evayellam nam vaindidil nanmayundo yavayam ni arivai tarum vallame umudeyai. Valvil evayellam nan vaindidil nanmayund. Whatever I achieve in life that will produce good, whatever if I achieve that in my life will be result in good. Yavayam ni arivai, you know all of that. Tarum vallame umudeyai, and you are able to give it. Therefore, Eppadiyo Arulvai, you bestow grace in whatever way you wish.
Could you please sing those two verses, please?
Eppadiyo Arulvai. I can't sing at all, by the way.
Whatever you can.
Eppadiyo Arulvai, aṉiya-bhāvam nān-arivain, ippadi appadi endrune Eppadiyo Arulvai, Eppadiyo Arulvai, Valvil evayellam nan vaindidil nanmayundo, yavayam ni arivai, tarum vallame umudeyai. Eppadiyo Arulvai.
Whatever way you want to shower me grace, just shower it that way.
Yeah.
So it's just beautiful. Thank you, Michael. Thank you so much. If there are no further questions,
Kumar, I know its time is up, but I have one more question. This thing about whatever God gives, we should be good with that and all that. Fantastic idea. It makes us complete. Now, Michael, a lot of our people's vasanas are such that we somehow look for appreciation externally from the material world, and hence we are driven towards all this. If you think about it, our needs are not that much. No one's needs are not that much. No one can convince me their needs are mighty. But we do that to get appreciation from whoever, from parents, this, that, and the other. And that is the root cause of why we are unable to accept that whatever God wills, it's good for us, it's good enough. He will give it at the right time.
Yes, that is the desire for appreciation, the desire to be liked, to be appreciated, to be. I mean, it takes many different forms, but that is a very, very strong desire of the ego. And that is potentially one of the most dangerous desires. Because even people who, Bhagavan says in one verse in our Anubandham, Anubandham.
Anubandham is attachment.
Yes. That's the supplement to the 40 verses. In verse 37, Ella ulahum turumbayinum. Even though all the worlds are renounced as mere straw, that means renouncing all the worldly pleasures. Maregal elamum kai kul irundalum. Even though all the Vedas, even though one's so learned, but all the Vedas are in one's hands, it's at one's fingertips. So one's renounced the whole world and all the Vedas are at one's fingertips. Though that is the case, Polla puhulchiyam vesi basum puha adime ahala vida amma aridu. Even though one has renounced all the pleasures of the world, and even though one has got all the Vedas at one's fingertips, if one falls under prey to that wicked courtesan, wicked prostitute of fame. Puhulchi means it covers everything from fame, appreciation, to be liked or appreciated or highly regarded by other people. That's what puhulchi means. That Bhagavan describes it, that desire for puhulchi as a wicked prostitute. If one falls a prey if one comes under the sway of that wicked prostitute called puhulchi, it is it is extremely difficult to free oneself from slavery to her. So of all the desires, even though we are able to renounce everything, even though we are so learned and we're able to renounce all the pleasures of the world, so long as we still have that liking to be liked, to be appreciated, to be famous, to be highly regarded, that desire is a very, very dangerous, because that desire, that's a very, very strong desire of the ego.
Thanks, Michael. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael. That was a good session. And we'll...
Can I say one more thing? It's why Bhagavan wrote that verse, because it's so dangerous, because so many people who come to this spiritual path, and it's very easy, if you're on the spiritual path and you seem to be, in the eyes of other people, to have renounced things, to have renounced worldly pleasures, there will be lots of people who appreciate you, who will be ready to worship you or put you on a pedestal. And particularly if you're learned and you're able to explain spiritual texts, or even if you're just able to explain Bhagavan's teachings like I'm doing now, there are people who put me on a pedestal. And it's a very, very dangerous place to be, because if we believe that there's something special about ourselves, that's why people are appreciating ourselves, that's going to be our downfall. So we have to be very, very vigilant, not to fall a prey to the desire for that type of appreciation, and we cannot prevent people appreciating us or putting us on a pedestal, but we shouldn't be fooled by just because people may think we are something very great. We have to look at ourselves and see, yes, I've still got so many desires, my mind is still so imperfect. How people are able to see me as something special, if God alone knows, Bhagavan alone knows. But it's so long as we take ourselves to be a person, we are imperfect. But no person, Bhagavan, if we are following Bhagavan's path, we should be indifferent to praise and blame. we should also refrain from praising and blaming other people, because no person is worthy of praise. Because so long we are a person, only so long as we rise as ego, and so long as we rise as ego, that's a fundamental defect. So we need to be, we need to recognize our own total unworthiness. That's the greatest safeguard against falling a prey to the attraction of this vile, this wicked courtesan called flattery.
Yeah, that is very powerful. I think I refer devotees to Tiruvāsakam verses there, which is where the humility just comes out so much, so nicely, of Manikavasha and other great saints.
Sadhu Om often used to say, humility is divinity.
Yes.
And there's a verse in Gurvacha Kukavai where Bhagavan says how God attained that position where he's worthy of being worshipped by the whole universe, the whole world. It is because he sees himself as lower than the lowest.
Yeah.
Or something, that's not the exact word, but it's something to that effect. That is, God is supreme because of his supreme humility, in other words.
Right. Thank you, Michael. Thank you so much.
We should always be very, very careful never to think of ourselves as better than anyone else.
Right. Or guiding or doing something, that'll just mess our progress.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you so much. So we'll meet again next month, and you'll be discussing verses 11 through 14. Is that right?
11 through 14, or maybe 15. I think probably up to 15.
I want to do up to 15. Okay, 11 through 15, which I'll deal with pranayama / yoga, culminating in the final state through that part. Thank you so much.
Okay, right.